Carpal tunnel syndrome. So many people complain about tingling and numbness in their wrists and in their fingers, the pain that wakes them up at night, the fact that they can't grip a hold of objects. Do you have carpal tunnel syndrome? I'm Dr. Joseph Baker from the Limerick Chiropractic Center, and this is your 10-minute talk for Tuesday. And we're going to be covering just a little bit about carpal tunnel syndrome. And this is one of those syndromes you hear so much about. And the name just simply describes where it is you're feeling that uncomfortableness. You're feeling the pain in that carpal tunnel area. Now, it usually has aching, tingling, numbness. Sometimes sharp pain sensations occur when you have this. In fact, one of the things that most individuals are not familiar with is the fact that most times females are 3 times more likely to have carpal tunnel syndrome. Now, as we get older, the tendency is greater and greater and greater that we may experience this. But there's a lot of reasons for that to happen. Tonight, we're going to talk about just a couple of those. In fact, before we continue, let me remind you, pause, like this video. Make sure that you're liking these videos in order to ensure that other people in your community have the opportunity of getting exposed to this basic, great information. Number 2 is leave me a comment below what your takeaway is. Maybe a question that this conversation provoked in your mind that you need to make sure that you're getting answered. Number 3 is share the information on your Facebook page. No easier way than to make sure that information gets spread through our community than to just simply share it amongst our friends group. So let's continue. This carpal tunnel, it's a tiny, tiny tunnel that's on the underside of the wrist. And in fact, it's one of those areas that when we look at our hand, or the palm of our hand, it's right where those 2 little bumps end up allowing the hand to form. Now, that carpal tunnel, that little trough that's there happens to be a ligament, a transcarpal ligament. That ligament helps to hold everything together. And let's remember, everything has a purpose in our body. Those 8 tiny bones that make up our wrists, those carpal bones, are all kept together by this little band. Now, we're going to talk in a bit about some of the surgical procedures. So let's remember that ligament has a purpose and a reason inside of our body. So when we go and we decide that we're going to alter it, there is a downstream effect that's going to occur that we're not going to experience immediately, but is going to happen. So hang tight, we're going to talk about that. Now, some of the really common symptoms of people who start to have problems in this area is the fact that they do get pins and needles. They get burning sensations in their hands. They might actually get tingling and numbness into their hands or their fingertips. Shooting pain back up away from the wrist towards the elbow or into the forearm might be one of those complaints that we hear patients talking about. And then finally, where the entire arm, all the way up to the shoulder, gets involved. Now, one of the key things for everybody to remember is our body has the capability of giving us all of those signals, none of those signals whatsoever, or it could vary them over time. And in fact, as we oftentimes see patients in our office, they've gone periods of time where they've self-medicated, they've changed and altered different activities. So the body in turn does have the ability to change the signal. We are wonderfully made. We are amazingly created and designed. And because of that, our brain is so intelligent, it is capable of doing things we can hardly imagine, like pulling the signal back if we're not listening to it, changing the signal depending upon the portion of the nerve that might actually be affected. In fact, sometimes there is no signal other than absolute weakness, and all of those things could happen. Now, there happens to be a lot of causes for carpal tunnel syndrome. In fact, oftentimes as we do that detailed history, as we take the background, a lot of times repetitive motions happen to be at the top of the list that most people think about. The problem is that, well, there's a lot of different things beyond that. The decrease in the carpal tunnel size. In fact, there's times when during pregnancy, because of increased swelling that occurs and water retention, well, there's a lot of excess pressure on the median nerve that travels through that little opening. And in turn, we can have those type of symptoms recreated. There's a lot of different ways of entrapping the nerve. In fact, even something that's 2.5, 3 feet away, like subluxations, bones that are out of place, not just in your neck, but also in your shoulder, are capable of producing referred pain syndromes down into the hand and through the fingers. Those subluxations, we sort of forget. We can't feel them when they first get started because only 10% of our nervous system can even transmit a pain signal. Well, just like a cavity, we could have those subluxations occurring for a long period of time before we ever get an indication that a problem was there. Now, part of the diagnosis happens to be, like I said, that detailed history and physical examination. Sometimes we're going to be doing muscle testing or different tests on the wrists and the fingers to help us understand how is the nerve flow getting through that area. At times it requires x-rays in order to look within to determine not just if subluxation is present, but what phase of spinal decay might the body be in. Maybe there's an anatomical change, like a thoracic outlet syndrome where the first rib is longer than it's supposed to be. Maybe there's something physical like that that's causing this as an effect that eventually shows up. Also, we can use what's called a nerve conduction velocity test, where we get to actually measure the resistance across that nerve. So even though your brain might be producing the signal at 100%, well, if your brain is not able to get it to the end point, all the way to the fingers at 100%, maybe that altered information is giving you those signals that you're getting. Now, treatments for carpal tunnel are across the board. Physical therapy is one of those treatments. A lot of people, they medicate. They just simply say, hey, listen, let me kill the pain. Let me stop the inflammation. They use steroids. They use non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. The list just keeps going on and on and on. And the problem is that oftentimes these things don't necessarily identify nor treat the root cause of the problem. In fact, a lot of times what ends up happening is we start to chase the signals around. What a poor way of trying to solve a problem. It's like the dog that's just simply chasing his tail. He never actually catches it. And that only leads to frustration, depression, and ultimately backing ourselves into the corner where we think that only surgery is an option for these problems. Now, wrist braces, they do help. They help to control the position of the wrist. Sometimes at night, well, people sleep with their hands curled up. They sleep with their hands underneath the pillow. So at times, just using that wrist brace helps to restrict some of the motion. Some of those conservative treatments are out there, and there's a lot of different ones, including, tractioning and exercises that are available. But like I said, in the medical world, ultimately the correction happens to be when in fact we do surgery. Now, I want you to think about this. Think of it just like taking the lid off of a pot. Well, the pot might be boiling. As soon as you take the lid off of it, the water isn't splattering around as much. You're relieving the pressure. Well, remember that transcarpal ligament. We're just going to cut and slice that. Well, that ligament had served a purpose. It kept all those bones together. Now we have an altered motion, an altered function in that wrist area, which leads to other mechanical problems down the road. The short-term gain is lessening the pressure. The long-term loss is the fact that, unfortunately, we're having to deal with that mechanical problem for the rest of our lives. Now, one of those non-invasive treatments happens to be just simply supplements. You're saying, well, supplements, what can a vitamin do for my wrist, my carpal tunnel? Oftentimes, we sort of forget that this B6 vitamin is necessary for the nerves in our body to regenerate, for them to continue to be able to function. So without that B6 present, well, our nerves are never going to function the way they're supposed to. B6 happens to be water soluble, which means just like vitamin C, you're going to dump it out of your system. So if we're not constantly replacing it, sadly, we're going to be working at a deficit. And there's some things that we do every day, like stress, medications, other things within our diet that cause us to dump vitamin B6. And listen, buyer beware. Not every vitamin B6 is exactly the same. So in turn, if in fact you're going to purchase a product like that, bring it into our office. We'll muscle test you on it to ensure that it's going to do what you desire it to do. Your chiropractic adjustments, if in fact your carpal tunnel syndrome is due to subluxations, well, by removing those subluxations, it's eliminating the stress and pressure that's actually at the root cause of your problem. Whether it's there in your neck, your shoulders, or your wrists, we need to be making sure that we're identifying the actual root cause. Some of the other or very conservative type of treatments happens to be cold laser treatment. This is FDA approved. In fact, the FDA had approved it specifically for carpal tunnel syndrome in order to act as a pain relief and an anti-inflammatory for the carpal tunnel. The wonderful thing is it's painless. It produces those endorphins and those kinins that not only make us feel better, but help the tissues repair more quickly. Same with shockwave therapy. Does exactly or very similar things where it strips and removes scar tissue. Because most of us have been doing the same thing again and again and again over a long period of time. And many of us have built up these problems that we're trying to solve. My hope by taking just these few minutes in sharing this information is to shed some light on some of the options that are available for you. In fact, we at the Limerick Chiropractic Center would encourage you, if in fact you've never had your spine checked, if in fact you are questioning what is actually at the root cause of my carpal tunnel syndrome, give us a call. Let's make sure that you actually test the system to ensure why you're going to do the next steps. If you have questions, leave them in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Dr. Joseph Baker from the Limerick Chiropractic Center.